Easton Maddox was the man everyone in Hawthorne Ridge trusted. A gentle watchmaker, a loving husband, a model citizen. But before Easton, there was Nolan Vexley, a fugitive, a suspected murderer, and a master of disguise. For 40 years he fooled his wife, his neighbors, and even the FBI. What they thought was kindness was calculated. What seemed like peace was a cover-up. And by the time the truth surfaced, Easton wasn't just a man with secrets. He was a walking illusion, hiding a trail of fire, death, and lies that stretched across decades. To the sleepy mountain town of Hawthorne Ridge, Easton Maddox appeared as a blessing. He arrived in the fall of 1983, driving an old Navy blue pickup truck with a camper shell and a license plate from Montana. He told people he was a retired military man turned watchmaker, looking to settle somewhere quiet. Everything about him was comforting: his calm voice, his pressed flannel shirts, and his habit of holding the door open for everyone, no matter their age. He rented a small, weathered building on Main Street and turned it into Maddox Timepieces, a shop that specialized in fixing vintage watches and clocks. People were immediately drawn to the precision of his work and the warmth of his personality. No one questioned where he came from. Small towns like Hawthorne Ridge didn't pry into the past if the present looked honest. Within months, Easton was part of every community event, helping organize winter coat drives, serving soup at local fundraisers, and reading to children at the library every Thursday. He seemed to have no family of his own, but that just made him more available to everyone else. People called him Uncle Easton, or the Clock Whisperer. When the mayor's watch stopped working days before his daughter's wedding, Easton fixed it in an hour and refused payment. By the time he met Clara, a local florist known for her delicate arrangements and quiet strength, he was already beloved. Clara had never married. She lived with her older sister in a small cottage on the edge of town and rarely dated. But when she met Easton at a summer craft fair, something clicked. He bought one of her pressed flower frames and asked if she'd like to share coffee sometime. Within 6 months, they were married in a modest ceremony behind the church, surrounded by neighbors who believed they were witnessing the start of something beautiful. Easton moved into Clara's cottage, and they merged their quiet lives. They never had children, but they had each other, and that seemed to be enough. Years passed, then decades. Easton maintained a strict routine. He opened his shop at 8 a.m. sharp every day except Sunday. He ate lunch at the same diner, always at the same booth. He repaired watches and clocks with such care it was almost poetic. Clara kept the house immaculate and tended to a thriving flower garden that won awards at the county fair. Nothing about their life raised questions. The local bank manager said Easton was the most punctual loan payer he had ever seen. The sheriff once joked that if every man were like Easton, he'd be out of a job. But beneath the well-crafted exterior, something darker lingered. There were hints, though they were small. Easton never allowed photographs of himself. When someone took a group photo at the Harvest Festival, he found a reason to step away. He never spoke of childhood or family or friends from before his arrival. When asked about his parents, he simply said they were long gone and changed the subject. He had no social security history prior to 1983, but no one checked, not in a place like Hawthorne Ridge. In April of 2022, Clara climbed into the attic to retrieve an old photo album. The couple had recently celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary, and she wanted to make a memory collage. While moving aside dusty boxes and holiday decorations, her foot slipped, and she reached out instinctively, grabbing onto a protruding beam. Her hand struck something hollow. Curious, she pulled at the beam and dislodged a weathered metal lockbox wedged deep between rafters. The box was heavy, the metal rusted with age. Its contents would shatter the peaceful illusion she had lived under for 4 decades. Inside were dozens of laminated cards, driver's licenses, military IDs, library cards, all bearing different names and states. There were old photographs, one of Easton with a woman and two small children on a picnic blanket, another of a house burning in the distance. And at the very bottom, folded carefully in plastic, was a yellowing newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Federal suspect in triple homicide still at large. Authorities fear cross state escape." The man's face in the grainy black and white photo was unmistakable. It was Easton. Except his name in the article was Nolan Vexley. In 1982, nearly 1,000 miles from Hawthorne Ridge, a man named Nolan Vexley was living in a secluded home on the outskirts of Marlow County, Oregon. His property was surrounded by dense pine forests and narrow, winding dirt roads. He worked as a contractor, mostly under the table jobs that paid cash. His wife, Leona Vexley, was a part-time receptionist at a veterinary clinic, and they had two children, 7-year-old Paige and 4-year-old Jonah. By most accounts, they kept to themselves. The neighbors didn't know them well, and the family rarely attended local events. But nothing seemed out of place until a cold night in November, when their house caught fire just before midnight. The flames were so intense they could be seen from 2 miles away. By the time fire crews arrived, the home was a charred ruin. Leona's body was found in the bedroom, while the children were discovered curled together in what used to be the living room. The initial assumption was a tragic electrical fire, but that changed quickly when investigators discovered 2 gasoline cans hidden behind a nearby shed and traces of accelerant on the living room floor. The fire was no accident, it was arson. And more troubling, Nolan Vexley was missing. The investigation moved fast. Detectives quickly learned that Nolan had visited the local bank 2 days before the fire and withdrawn almost every dollar from their joint account, nearly $48,000. Security footage showed him wearing sunglasses and a hat, looking over his shoulder more than once. His truck, a rust-colored Chevy, was found abandoned 2 counties away, keys still in the ignition, wiped clean of fingerprints. A single partial print, later matched to Nolan, was recovered from one of the gas cans near the fire. That, along with the missing money, turned Nolan from presumed victim to prime suspect overnight. The case became high profile quickly, not just because of the horrific deaths, but because of how cleanly Nolan vanished. He had no credit history after the fire, no cell phone activity, no driver's license renewals, and no known family in the area. The FBI joined the investigation within weeks, labeling Nolan Vexley a federal fugitive and adding him to their list of most wanted individuals. They circulated his face across the country. Billboards were posted in major cities. Tips poured in from all over, but none panned out. Nolan had vanished like a ghost. Then came the connections no one had initially seen. A retired fire investigator named Howard Killian, who'd worked on 2 similar cases in the 1970s and early 1980s, noticed striking similarities between the Vexley fire and other deadly house fires. In each case, the male head of the household disappeared just before or after the fire. Each fire had a suspicious origin. In Nevada, a man named Bryce Tanner vanished after a fire killed his partner and young daughter. In Colorado, a man named Eli Ward disappeared following the destruction of his mountain home, which claimed the life of his elderly mother. Though the identities differed, something about the pattern was hauntingly familiar. The problem was, none of these men were ever found. Each had left behind a burned house, dead family, and unanswered questions. Law enforcement didn't want to officially link the crimes without concrete proof, but off the record, investigators believed they might be dealing with the same man using different identities. The theory was killing one man, moving across state lines, destroying one life after another, assuming new names, and blending into new communities with terrifying ease. Back in Hawthorne Ridge, Clara Maddox sat in her kitchen, staring at the newspaper clipping and the photos spread across the table. She recognized the young man's face instantly. It was her husband, His jawline, the scar above his eyebrow, even the tired but familiar eyes. Her hands trembled as she pieced together what this meant. For decades, she had lived alongside someone she thought she knew. But the name Easton Maddox had never existed before 1983. Rather than confront him, Clara made a decision she would carry alone for days. She scanned the photo and the article, attached them to an anonymous email, and sent them to the FBI tip line. In the message, she wrote only a single sentence: "Suf, I believe this man lives in Hawthorne Ridge," under the name Easton Maddox. Within 48 hours, agents from the Portland field office were deployed. What began as a cold case now had a new lead, and Easton, or Nolan, had no idea that the life he built over 40 years was about to unravel completely. When the FBI received the anonymous tip pointing to Easton Maddox in Hawthorne Ridge, they approached the lead with skepticism. Over the years, they had received countless false reports claiming to have spotted Nolan Vexley in different parts of the country. But something about this tip felt different. The message included a recent photo of Easton, and when agents compared it to the aged composite of Nolan Vexley, the facial features aligned alarmingly well. The scar above the eyebrow, the slightly crooked nose, the deep, set eyes. They weren't just similar, they were nearly identical. The Bureau launched a quiet internal operation known as Sable Curtain. They couldn't afford to tip off a man who had avoided capture for 4 decades. This time, they needed to move carefully and with precision. 2 undercover agents posing as antique watch collectors arrived in Hawthorne Ridge within days. They began frequenting Maddox timepieces, engaging Easton in friendly conversations about craftsmanship, Swiss gears, and rare mechanical builds. Easton, unaware of their true identity, welcomed them with the same politeness he gave everyone else. He offered tips, shared stories about his time in the army, and even gave one of the agents a discount on a refurbished timepiece. Behind the scenes, the agents were collecting more than watches. They gathered fingerprints from coffee cups, doorknobs, and even a small magnifying glass Easton had lent them during a demonstration. Every item was carefully bagged and sent to the forensic lab for comparison. The match came within 72 hours. The partial print found on the gas can at the Vexley fire scene matched the print taken from a coffee mug in Maddox timepieces. It was an exact hit. Now the FBI had proof. Easton Maddox was Nolan Vexley, but they weren't ready to arrest him, not yet. They wanted to understand how he had remained hidden so long. More importantly, they wanted to know if he had killed before. Agents dug into every trace of Easton Maddox's life. What they found shocked them. The Easton identity had been fabricated in 1983, created using a deceased child's birth record from Kansas. From that foundation, he had built layer upon layer of legitimacy. Fake degrees, forged employment records, tax documents, business licenses. Every detail was expertly crafted. His financial records revealed something more disturbing. Over the past 20 years, Easton had bought and sold properties in multiple states through shell corporations. The transactions were buried under aliases. But when the agents unraveled the web, they discovered a pattern. Many of the properties were tied to communities that had experienced mysterious fires or missing persons cases. Each time, Easton had left just before law enforcement investigations intensified. Digging deeper, they discovered that Easton operated a small but lucrative side business through online watch auctions. Most buyers assumed they were dealing with a seasoned collector. But the money flowing through the accounts was significant. Over $3.2 million had moved through various accounts linked to Easton in the last 15 years. The funds were laundered through international transfers, sometimes through artwork, sometimes through rare metals, but always under false names. Agents began to suspect that Easton hadn't just been hiding, he had been evolving. Each new identity allowed him to test new systems, explore new aliases, and exploit fresh opportunities. He wasn't just a man on the run. He had become a master of reinvention. And then came the final, most chilling connection. A retired detective from Elko, Nevada reached out after hearing rumors about the reopened Vexley case. He provided details of a 1980 house fire that killed a woman and child, leaving the father, a man named Bryce Tanner, missing. The crime scene mirrored the Vexley fire. Gasoline accelerants, missing husband, false bank withdrawal. When photos of Tanner were analyzed using modern facial recognition software, they showed a 96% match to an even earlier alias used by Easton Maddox. This wasn't one case. It wasn't even two. The FBI now believed they were dealing with a long-term, methodical killer who had taken on at least 3 different lives, each ending in fire and tragedy. Their priority changed. No longer just an arrest. It was a matter of national urgency. They had to bring Easton in before he disappeared again. Plans were drawn. Surveillance doubled. His phone was tapped. A GPS tracker was secretly installed in his truck during a staged oil change by an undercover technician. They watched every move he made. But Easton remained predictable. Up at 600 a.m., shop open at 800, lunch at noon, dinner at home by 6:30. No signs of deviation, no signs of panic. Until one morning, he didn't open the shop. His truck was gone. And Easton Maddox had vanished. Again. The moment Easton Maddox failed to open his shop, every agent involved in Operation Sable Curtain knew something had gone wrong. For 40 years, he had maintained a flawless routine. His absence was a red flag waving in a storm of quiet. Agents scrambled. The GPS tracker installed beneath his truck's rear bumper had been disabled, cleanly, without triggering any alerts. His phone was turned off, his bank cards untouched. It was as if he had anticipated their every move and disappeared before the walls could fully close in. A search began instantly. Drones scanned the winding roads, leaving Hawthorne Ridge. Surveillance teams reviewed nearby gas station footage and traffic cams, but none showed him leaving town. It was later that day, a ranger near Pennicrest National Forest called in a tip. He reported an abandoned truck found off a restricted fire trail. No tags, no driver, but a small stash of cash and a knife left on the passenger seat. The make, model, and plate matched Easton's vehicle. The forest was vast. Over 70,000 acres of cliffs, rivers, and dense pine cover. The agents knew this terrain could swallow a man whole if he knew how to survive. And Easton, it turned out, did. In his garage, agents found detailed topographical maps of the region with routes highlighted and notes written in code. There was a military-grade compass, dehydrated food packs, and custom-made hiking gear that had never been used publicly. They had underestimated him. He hadn't just been hiding. He had been planning an escape for years. Teams of federal agents, forest rangers, and local law enforcement fanned out through the wilderness using thermal imaging, search dogs, and helicopters. For 3 days, they combed ravines and ridgelines, following traces of disturbed brush, footprints, and discarded ration wrappers. They found a half-buried satchel containing burner phones, old passports, and a new identity, Grant Holloway. It was clear Easton had been preparing for another transformation. Had Clara not uncovered his secret, he may have vanished entirely, slipping into a new life without leaving so much as a whisper behind. On the 4th day, a break came. A backpacker reported seeing a strange man along a ridge trail, wearing a ranger uniform that looked off. Too clean, the patch slightly crooked. When shown a photo of Easton, the hiker immediately confirmed the match. Agents closed in. The final confrontation took place at the edge of Snake Valley, a sheer cliffside drop above a river known for swallowing the unwary. Easton was seated on a flat rock overlooking the gorge, back straight, face unreadable. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands in surrender the moment he saw the agents approaching. But there was something in his expression. Not defeat, but something closer to satisfaction. As if even being found, even being captured, was all part of a plan only he fully understood. He was transported under heavy guard to a federal holding facility in Helena. There, Forensic teams processed him while interrogators prepared for what they believed would be a breakthrough confession. But Easton said nothing. He requested no lawyer, signed no documents, and stared silently at every agent who tried to draw words from him. The man who had fooled an entire town, built a life from ashes, and evaded federal authorities for decades, now seemed entirely unshaken. Agents searched his home again. Under the floorboards of his shop, they discovered a hidden compartment containing what they had hoped for and feared most. A handwritten journal spanning over 30 years, written in neat, deliberate cursive. In it, Easton recorded details of his aliases, financial transactions, failed identities, and coded entries that suggested crimes never reported, victims never found, and movements never tracked. It was a blueprint of how he became invisible. The most haunting entry came from 1983, the year he arrived in Hawthorne Ridge. It read, "To survive, you must become the silence people ignore. The more they believe in your kindness, the less they search for your shadow." The agents now realized they hadn't just caught a fugitive. They had captured a man who had mastered the art of deception to such a degree. He had lived among them as a myth wrapped in truth. The public would soon know the name Easton Maddox as a fraud. But in that forest, on that cliff, he had almost become a legend. A man who could vanish from history, rebuild from ashes, and smile as the world unraveled around him. News of Easton Maddox's arrest spread across the country like wildfire. Small town newspapers, national media outlets, and every major true crime blog seized the story. Headlines screamed of betrayal, double lives, and a decades-long deception so complete that even seasoned FBI veterans admitted they had never seen anything like it. In Hawthorne Ridge, shock turned into disbelief, and disbelief into paranoia. The man they had trusted, respected, even loved, was not only a liar but a suspected murderer whose crimes spanned states, identities, and generations. Clara Maddox disappeared from public view almost immediately. After learning the truth, she had cooperated with investigators quietly but declined all interview requests and refused to attend the trial. She sold the cottage within 2 weeks of Easton's arrest, emptied their joint bank account, and moved without telling anyone her destination. Neighbors speculated endlessly, but no one could blame her. She had lived with a phantom, built a life on lies, and celebrated anniversaries with a man who may have murdered his previous family and many others. Her silence, like his, became a part of the mystery. Easton's trial was held under strict security in a federal court in Oregon, where his first known crime had occurred. Prosecutors charged him not only with the murders of Leona, Page, and Jonah Vexley, but also with multiple counts of arson, identity fraud, and interstate flight. As evidence was presented, the case unfolded like a meticulously written horror novel. Photographs, fingerprints, DNA samples, forged documents, and entries from his hidden journal were used to stitch together a timeline of his movements over 4 decades. Each false identity he had used left a trail: Bryce Tanner, Ellie Ward, Grant Holloway, and more. Each had surfaced briefly in a town, appeared during or shortly after suspicious deaths or fires, then vanished. Investigators connected him to 2 additional deaths: a retired widow in Colorado and a mother of 2 in New Mexico. Cases previously ruled as accidental, but the journal revealed precise details only the killer would know. In total, Easton Maddox was suspected in at least 7 murders, though prosecutors focused on the strongest cases to secure conviction. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity. They suggested that Easton had experienced a psychological break, that the stress of financial hardship and family struggles in the early 80s led to a dissociative identity pattern. But the prosecution destroyed that narrative with hard evidence of planning, control, and a chilling pattern of manipulation. The journal made one thing clear: this was not a man unraveling. This was a man calculating. The jury took less than 5 hours to deliberate. Easton Maddox, born Nolan Vexley, was found guilty on all charges. The judge delivered the sentence swiftly: 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As the gavel struck and the court adjourned, Easton remained still, his face expressionless. He never spoke during the trial. Not one word in his defense. Not one moment of remorse. After sentencing, he was transferred to a federal supermax prison, where he would spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. Even there, he continued to mystify guards and staff. He read constantly, requested no visitors, and refused therapy. Psychologists described him as one of the most complex sociopathic personalities they had ever encountered. Able to mirror empathy without ever feeling it. Able to build entire lives from fiction and convince others it was real. In Hawthorne Ridge, the storefront of Maddox timepieces was eventually sold to a hardware store chain, but no one wanted the building. For months, it stood boarded up, its windows covered with old newspapers. Some residents reported hearing ticking inside the empty shop, though no clocks remained. Others claimed to see a light flicker upstairs at night. Most believed it was just their minds struggling to reconcile reality with memory. The case of Easton Maddox became a cautionary tale, a terrifying reminder that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they smile from across the counter, fix your grandfather's watch, and wave at your children on their way to school. For 40 years, Easton had fooled them all. Neighbors, friends, even the most advanced investigative systems in the country. And while justice had finally caught up with him, the unsettling truth remained: no one really knew how many lives he had touched or destroyed. The man who lived as a lie had turned his entire existence into a crime. A story of deceit so complete that it now stood as one of the most disturbing and unforgettable criminal cases in American history.